Hello and welcome to the ASB Investment Podcast, the show that keeps you up to date on the markets and helps you make smart choices with your investments. These are entirely our own views and that of our guests. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that will be happy to chat if you need. Well, welcome to the latest edition of the ASB Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Nigel Grant, as always, and in this latest episode, we'll be exploring the concept of financial literacy, so why it's crucial, how wealth providers like us assist customers in becoming more financially literate, and the role of advice in improving, that topic as such. So today I'm excited to be joined, by one of the top experts, in my opinion, of who I have had the pleasure of meeting in my life, and one of the top ones in the investment landscape in NZ. I call it the Wizard of Wealth, or the Merlin of markets. I've just said here just to razz him a little bit, but that's Mr. Frank Jasper. Frank, how are you?
A little embarrassed after that introduction.
Great.
And I will say my son's name is Harry, so I'm starting to feel a little bit like I'm in a Harry Potter story, and I need to don the Dumbledore outfit. But it's lovely to chat.
And it's great. It's obviously great to have you here for the first time. But just briefly, just tell us a little bit about your role with ASB, and then if you want to, your experience leading up to that.
Yeah, and I've got to say it's the perfect topic to capture, because my role at ASB is on the investment committee, where we help build the ASB investment solution. So thinking about the best structure, the best way to help clients achieve their long-term goals. But the idea of financial literacy and of helping Kiwis make really great decisions about their money has really been almost the kind of guiding organising thought for my entire career. So I've been lucky enough to be involved in financial markets for over 30 years now, managing money, advising customers, working with some of the biggest asset owners in the country, but always with that idea of how do we all make better decisions and grow our wealth.
And I guess, I'm giving the listeners a heads up here. If you haven't already, grab a pen and paper. There'll be some real nuggets in this chat to tap into that experience. And just to paint a bit of a picture, more of a picture as such, in terms of outside of work, I know a few things that you get up to, but in terms of, how would you say, what's something you've got going on at the moment, or is there a pet project underway?
Yeah, like it's maybe financial markets, you get used to living a life with a bit of risk. So there's usually something that involves sort of heading downhill too fast, so be it on a mountain bike or on a pair of skis, or turning around the other way and climbing up a mountain and having a look down when you get to the top. So usually something outdoors, usually something that involves a bit of sweat, a bit of hard work, but a few smiles along the way.
Yeah, I as I've got to know you, I marvel at the latter in particular, the going up the mountain after watching a few of those Netflix documentaries. I marvel at. So well done. So into the first kind of section is on the basics as such. So if we begin there, what exactly is financial literacy? And there's definitions all out there, but in your mind, what is it and why is it important?
Yeah, it's a super interesting one to think about how to define financial literacy. But I almost think about it in reverse, is how do we get enough knowledge that we can make really good decisions to manage our both our wealth, but also manage our day-to-day financial decisions. So it's having that capability to make really sound decisions and manage our money well.
And so would you say that includes knowledge about kind of, I guess sometimes you consider them the basics around budgeting, saving, through to, I guess, things that we'd probably spend more time on. I guess I always think that the further you go down the rabbit hole, the more you get into investing, but it does include things like budgeting and saving, the real basics?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's like all these things, you think about when you start school, right? You start off by learning how to read, you start off by learning how to write your name, and then one day turns it around, you're doing calculus and you're learning about, differential equations. And so financial literacy is exactly the same, that we start off by learning those kind of more basic concepts, but then building on those and layering more knowledge over time. But always, it is amazing, and it never ceases to amaze me that we, as sort of financial markets, quote unquote experts, we can make this world seem incredibly complicated.
We can.
But actually those fundamentals of how does interest work, how does compounding work, how do you manage your day-to-day wealth, those kind of core ideas, they resonate through all of the decisions I've ever made in my financial life, from the most simple to the most apparently complex.
And just, considering, I know we'll get to some tips and tricks and kind of things we recommend as such later in the show, but, considering that it's as much for how we help people in terms of, institutions, organizations, how do wealth and financial providers like ASB contribute to enhancing that literacy amongst customers?
I think the number one thing we can do is people who are working with customers and building their knowledge is just to share our knowledge in a really open way. So things like this podcast, Nigel, that you've been really championing is a really powerful way that we can contribute. I think it's just having really good conversations with people and meeting people where they're at. So if they want to have a conversation about those simpler things because they're building their knowledge, having that simple conversation, taking the jargon out of things and helping people feel included, and really just sharing our breadth of knowledge and the kind of people that we've got in our team. So, being open and just and enjoying these chats.
And I know when we were sort of setting up some of the things we wanted to talk to, and you've also raised it already, is it's what's the word? Making the complex less complex. Do you have any insights into why kind of it is so complex, and why why it is that way, and why that puts people off potentially?
Yeah, it's sort of asking like why human beings. I think that be a bit careful, but it's very tempting for quote experts to make things sound more complex than they are in order to make themselves feel good about their expertise. And it's not simple to make money in financial markets. It is difficult, but it's not complex. And I think that's the thing that's interesting, to delineate between the complexity of the words we use and the ideas we use versus how you execute it. And so I think it's just too easy for people to put too much jargon around things and not be as inclusive as possible. And it's possibly just a bit of human nature there, Nigel, that people love to wrap themselves in the cloak of complexity.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get it wrong. Maybe I might get it wrong, but I think I'm going to say Einstein, but it could be any noted physicist or scientist. I think sort of said that the highest form of intelligence is simplicity. I think so.
Actually, if you're talking about scientists, Richard Feynman, very famous scientist, was involved in the Manhattan Project, probably not his crowning achievement, but he always had this idea that if you can't write it down in words that a kind of 10-year-old would understand, you probably don't understand it yourself. So I've always found, personally for me, and I think it's a good test for all of us, if we can't find a way to illuminate those kind of complex ideas in a way that your mum could understand, or your child could understand, or your auntie could understand, you probably don't understand it as much enough yourself. And so it's a really good test of your own insight. Can you explain it to somebody else in a way that really resonates?
And I guess a takeaway before we get into the next section, the takeaway from me would be, don't feel embarrassed if when something's being explained to you, you don't understand it. You are quite entitled to ask, I don't understand that. Explain it to me more simple, right?
Oh, look, I think incredibly powerful 3 words in all of our lives is I don't know or I don't understand. There's plenty of things in financial markets, and I've been doing this for a long time, where you look at what's going on in the world and I don't know what's going on. And I think being humble enough to say, I don't know, I need to learn more, or simply realise that some things are unknowable right now, actually is an incredibly liberating place to be. So I think, never, ever, ever feel bad about that.
So before we get into the sort of the next section around the role of advice in improving financial literacy, any sort of other final reflections on kind of what we've been talking?
Yeah, actually, there is something that's that crossed my desk, or my email desk as it is these days, fairly recently, that I thought really kind of captured for me the essence of why this stuff is important. And that is some research that was done in the very aptly named Journal of Financial Literacy and Wellbeing.
I love it, Frank.
Who knew there was such a thing? But turns out there is. But there was a couple of Italian academics that had done some research. This is a little bit pointing out the sort of blindingly obvious, but the research was very, very clear that people who have a level of financial literacy, and we'll talk in a moment about how they determine that, but have a level of financial literacy that's solid, unsurprisingly, they make better financial decisions. And what do they mean by that? They tend to borrow a little bit less money, and this is adjusted for incomes and all sorts of other kind of things to make sure it's moderated correctly, that tend to borrow a little bit less money, tend to be more financially resilient, and as a result of that, they have less financially stressed lives. So there's a really clear line between understanding these core tenets of financial literacy and having a more comfortable financial life. And so this makes this a really good goal to achieve. Better financial literacy, better lives, happy days.
Yeah, so I guess it's important when you hear that it's not just industries like ours suggesting it. I guess when you've got academic peer-reviewed things as well, saying there's actual causality there, that's something you can't necessarily debate, right?
Yeah, and it makes it a conversation that, if there are grandparents or parents listening, to talk to your kids about, because it's those things that will help set them up for a better life. And what do we mean by financial literacy? The way that this particular study looked at it was through the lens of, they call them the big three or the big five financial questions. They're questions to gauge a level of financial literacy that have been come up with another of these outstanding sounding organisations, the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Centre. Again, who knew that such a thing existed? But they've got a series of quite simple questions, but they're really delving into, do you understand compound interest? Do you think a portfolio of shares or an individual share was more risky? Do you have a basic understanding of how the bond market works? And these are fairly simple questions, but the relationship between understanding the answers to those questions and financial outcomes is very, very clear. So really, again, worth going away and doing your own research on that, but in taking the test, because you can do it online. We'll put that in the show notes, I think is the phrase that they put on these things. Sorry, Nigel, trying to take over your job, but
I like it.
But this level of financial literacy will help you have a better financial life.
And to sort of that next section, I guess we'll get to some of the things you can do as well yourselves. But what is the role? The role of advice is critical, right? In improving that financial literacy and raising it. In your opinion, Frank, what are some of the key reasons why having access to it minimum and then actually, I guess, enacting on it is so critical?
Yeah, and look, I'm going to start in a really strange way here and say I don't like the word advice. It's one that's never really gelled with me very much. But I like the idea of having a financial coach in your corner to help you become a better saver, more financially literate, a better investor, and to feel more empowered in managing your own money. And I'm a pretty simple bloke, right? Many of us have woken up on a Monday morning and thought, holy heck, how am I going to put the kids through school? How am I going to save for my retirement? How am I going to pay the mortgage off? We've all got these financial concerns that we've got. And having a coach in our corner that can help us solve those problems and can help us feel more in control of our lives, I think is an incredibly powerful thing. By calling it a coach rather than thinking about it as purely advice, we're now thinking about a two-way relationship. So it's not a one-way relationship. It's not somebody sitting there saying, thou shalt save more money, or thou shalt do this, or thou shalt do that. It's somebody working as part of my team to help me be better off and help make me a better player of the game. So I think it's super powerful, but particularly if you think about it in that way, I think you can really leverage that relationship and build something really impressive.
I'm just trying to think of all the future sports analogies I'll get to crowbar in here now using that. But I guess in our as we were going back and forth prepping for this, you were also using I can think it fits in nicely with the coach analogy as the advisors as educators, right? So in terms of that two-way relationship, what does the ideal two-way relationship look like in your mind, just tapping into kind of what you've seen throughout your career?
Yeah, I think it is, for a start, having that ability to have a really honest conversation with somebody and connect with them as a human being, I think is very much the core of that you feel that you can ask anything, they can ask you anything, and you can be deeply kind of honest with each other. But I think it's that kind of, and I'm going to sound very new age here, but having that kind of growth mindset over time as you build your own knowledge and expertise. So, and again, if we go back to that school idea, when you start school, the teacher's telling you everything, you're simply listening and learning and beginning to engage in your own study and over time, but you are very much getting to that level of understanding that you can start to then build your own knowledge and information. So if I think about how a great advisor relationship might start, the advisor might start giving you a financial plan. It's quite prescriptive, but over time, you're developing your knowledge, you're learning, and you're becoming more of a kind of equal relationship with that advisor over time. And in fact, for me, the sort of the nirvana goal was always that you're just dealing with people that you know, that are kind of your friends, and that you're simply sharing some information with them. They're sharing information with you, and you're both learning from each other. And I think that's, and as a client of that advisor, you feel increasingly empowered that you know why this is going to work out for you. So that you're not sitting on a Monday morning worrying about that stuff. You're waking up on a Monday morning getting on with your life. You know?
And just to test with you, I guess from what you've seen over your career as well, and working with how I would describe as, I'm sure, clients with wildly variant means behind them. Is it correct? You've seen similar levels of financial literacy across the spectrum, regardless of the amount of money you've had in the bank. What I'm trying to say is kind of, it's not just those who are starting off in their journey that are asking some 101 questions. It's across the board, right?
We've all got very different journeys in our lives, right? And for some people, that journey has taken them down the path of learning a lot about wealth management, financial markets, financial planning. They've kind of covered that ground early in their lives, and they're a long way up the curve. For some people, that's not something that they start to think about till later in their lives. And in fact, the relationship between kind of level of knowledge in markets and wealth, for me, is a pretty loose relationship.
Sure.
In fact, you could argue that if you've gone on and built a really great business, the last thing you should have been thinking about was financial markets. You're busy building the world's best plumbing business or the world's best, widget manufacturing business, and you're actually doing something with your life, not worrying about what was going on in the S&P 500. So again, for some reason, I'm going to share a personal story. For some reason, I was like that strange 13-year-old that was super interested in financial markets and began learning about that stuff really young. And so it's just, don't quite know why that happened, but that was the way that I was wired. So I got into this game pretty early. But
yeah, because I know there's a commonly held, I guess, in the industry that I don't have the means necessarily, let alone knowledge, to go and seek advice. Whereas actually, as you've said, some people who have a significant, have sold a business or a farm, may have just the same level of knowledge that you have, but they just have different means. So starting is the most critical point.
100%.
And just so in terms of we've talked about kind of the role advice plays, but what I know we talk about this quite often, and you send things to me as well. And what can customers do themselves apart from, or in addition to speaking to someone, to improve their own financial literacy?
Yeah, so I think that speaking to somebody and the mindset you take to that's the number one thing. And again, it feels a little new agey to say this, but if you go in with those two kind of mindsets of curiosity and questions, those conversations it radically changes the nature of those conversations. Now, as part of that, one question I'd always ask an advisor is, hey, what else should I be reading? What else should I be looking at that could help? And that they should be sharing stuff with you kind of proactively. But look, one of the things we are really endeavouring to do and how we communicate with our customers at ASB is to make sure that we don't just tell you the news about what's going on in your portfolio, but we'll always try to incorporate some insight into why things are happening in markets, or some insight that will help level up your game as an investor. So we're really proactive in trying to bake that into everything we do. We'll often include recommendations of books or people that we're reading or people that have inspired us as part of those conversations. So that's a really source of really, really good information. I love reading. So there's, the likes of the Howard Markses of the world, the Warren Buffetts of the world, the Joel Greenblatts of the world, reading stuff that's written by those really good investors. I think oftentimes the challenge for us, if we get interested in this, though, is the wood for the trees problem. And what do I mean by that? There's an unbelievable amount written about financial markets, but there's a lot less written about investing and what makes you a successful long-term investor. And if I was to give anybody some advice, and that is try and avoid the noise and the news and try and focus on learning things that have got long-term currency to them. And so, what do I mean by that? Listening to me or anybody with a job like mine opining about what they think the market's going to do next week is kind of a waste of time, because frankly, this fits into the I don't know category. 2 or 3 weeks ago, none of us knew that Iran was about to launch a bunch of drones at Israel. That changed the shape of the market, at least in the short term. So, the short term is incredibly unpredictable. What is more predictable is how do I make sound long-term portfolio and wealth management decisions that will set me up to be better over time. And I think the more we learn about those sorts of things, the less we're going to be caught up in the news and the hype and the current meme stock, the sort of story of the day. And that stuff is not so worthy of our attention, in my opinion.
I kind of subscribe to the practice of, build your strategy or the long-term decision you're making on things that are enduring, right? That seems a lot better place than kind of just, attaching your sail to the latest,
Oh, absolutely. This is sort of outside investing, but Jeff Bezos talks about this from a business strategy point of view. He says, rather than trying to sort of guess the things that will change, anchor your business on the things that won't change over time. So for Amazon in the e-commerce platform, he said, build your business based on, are customers going to want less choice? Are they going to want slower deliveries? And are they going to want to pay higher prices? Probably not. So if you can keep delivering things quicker, providing more choice and driving prices down, you're going to have a great business. And so getting that idea of fundamentals.
One final question I had on this, which is it's a question that people have asked me in the past, and I know we've been both we've caught the bug as such, so we lap everything up. But a lot of people aren't hardwired like that, and they ask, do I need to be informed before I have my first advice conversation, or can I have my advice conversation and then start learning, self-directed as such, or is it a combination of both? Do you have a recommended approach to take, or is there no, best approach?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure there's a best approach. There's an element of, know thyself so that you find the way that you operate best. But I think my general advice would be pick the phone up and talk to somebody. In fact, talk to as many people as you can. If you've got friend networks, you've got your advisor at ASB, you've got other people whose opinions you respect, just have those conversations. Because I think what you're doing in having those kind of open-ended curiosity-based conversations is you're kind of learning the questions that you want to ask, and you're learning a little bit about yourself, and you're learning a little bit about the things you want to discover, and then you can start to layer your reading and your insight around that. But I think until the train leaves the station, you're going nowhere. I think personally that's the place I would start. But so very dependent on the kind of way and the kind of person that you are. But harks back to the thing at the beginning, though. That first conversation might feel a bit uncomfortable because you might think, God, I don't know enough. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough expertise. Just try not to let those things worry you. Just pick the phone up and say, I want to find a coach. I want to get better. How do we go? How do we start? And
to your point, like one of my wonderfully, it's not even a word. My favourite quotes is from Mark Twain, I believe, and it's it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's the things you think you know for certain that just ain't so. So it's okay to say you don't know things. To your point, earlier, asking those questions versus holding on to convictions that maybe aren't true isn't necessarily the way to go, right?
And maybe if we go back to sporting analogies, I can read a lot of books about playing tennis, but I've probably got to pick a tennis racket up at some stage and whack a ball.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so to wrap up, we're nearly at the finish line, but we're going to go into my usual one final question as such. As listeners will know, I ask this of all our guests, and I'm sure we're going to get a good answer here. So, Frank, what's something you're reading or watching, whether it's one of the things we've already talked about that you can give an example of, or listening to that you can share with the listeners for the takeaway?
Actually, this is going to sound ridiculously, I was going to say pretentious. I'm not sure that's the right word, but my kind of deep love as an investor is individual companies and picking stocks. And at the core of that, it's really understanding how does strategy work for business. And it's been a lifelong fascination of trying to understand that. So I read a lot of books around these ideas. And one of the books I'm reading at the moment is around luxury brands and how they operate. If you look at where a lot of wealth is being created in markets, those luxury brands have created phenomenal shareholder value for a very long time. And in fact, the LVMH firm is the owner there is one of the wealthiest people in the world. And so I'm really interested in understanding. And I've got to say, I do not understand luxury at all. I don't understand, handbag's a handbag. It turns out you pay a couple $100,000 for a Birkin, if not more. And so I'm just super interested in how do we pick, as an investor, how could we pick the difference between a brand that's definitely got those luxury credentials and is protecting that luxury moat versus the businesses that don't. So, business strategy books, love them. But that's probably that's after your first call to the advisor. That's when you're quite deep down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I was thinking there's a few podcasts like that. I think there's one like the Acquired, or there's the Founders podcast that kind of go deep dives into some of those companies and the backstories as well. So that will be the listening version. I was going to shout out, my thing would just be to start, as non-descriptive as that is, just to start reading and asking those questions. But I was going to call out also, just to share, it's probably further up the nerd curve as such, but I was going to call out the book that you gave me, Frank, which is one of the aforementioned books by Howard Marks, who I'm a big fan of, as you know. But the one Frank gave me was Mastering the Market Cycle. And I just thought there's a particular point in there I was thinking of this morning, which is, I think Mr. Marks refers to, when you're going through times when the economy or your budget is feeling a little bit tight, those periods actually sow the seeds of the next good time. And that's why, it's a cycle that we go through. So, the things that we go through now, it's always, a comfort to me to know that kind of, challenges we've got on now are actually setting us up for the next good time. So that's one bit of guidance that I've always, held on to, whether that's, interest rates or, what your KiwiSaver's doing as well. That's what I've held tight. So that's all for today's episode. Frank, thank you for joining us, and to the listeners for tuning in. Whether you've been listening to this whilst gardening like I do, doing the dishes, or during your morning commute, I hope you found me and Frank's conversation helpful with not only some tips and tricks to get started, but also to help you provide a degree of comfort for, this topic isn't easy, and don't feel like it's only you who feels that. But the best place, I hope it's come through strong enough, the best place to start is just to start reading and listening and talk to someone, to start you off on that journey, or to check in if you're already along it. So Frank, just want to say thank you for joining us. Hope to have you here in person next time.
Thank you.
And so until next time, everyone, happy financial literacy learning, and it's bye for now. Thanks for listening to the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on a future show, get in touch with us at podcasts@asb.co.nz.